things I'm really going to need to take scene by scene, starting with Helena's explanation.
There's not too terribly much that needs to be pointed out here, except for a weird shift in motivation from Kaz.
Kaz seems really quick to decide that things are better now that the Bachelor board is gone.
But in just the last episode, he was complaining to high heavens about the way things were going. About Archangelo wanting to be his friend. He was complaining about that. It seems really odd for him to suddenly say, oh, things are much better now, you know? Especially considering, by the way, the mail had just escaped. You just fucked up your job because of things going good for you. Fucking Christ.
Whatever, the Remembrancer shows up to perform a highly illegal search of Kaz's apartment.
And this isn't based on just the law as we know it either. This is based on Neo-Yokio law here, folks.
In the last episode, Agatha brought up that Kaz has magistocratic immunity, and here the Remembrancer just barges in even after Kaz says now's a bad time.
And I hate to have to point out this many storytelling flaws this quick into the episode, but I kinda have to. It's my job.
It is worth noting him fighting Sadie when we think he's going to find Helena.
Because that's gonna come up later. Yep. Gonna come up later.
Actually, the young master's neighbors are quite sensitive to smoke. Best not to.
Good thing I brought my vape.
Okay, enough of this shtick. We have our first plan. Get to Grand Central for the only train out for the entire day.
This involves disguising Helena as Mila Malevich. There's a press conference.
I just want to say screw all these chumps. I don't know if I'll win today, but I'll certainly be the most beautiful driver out there.
Is Archangelo gay?
Right, so now they have to maintain the disguise in front of the Remembrancer at an oyster bar.
And although I've been pretty bored with this Helena and hiding shtick for as long as it's been going on, this scene actually has some very interesting elements to that.
Well, first of all, we have the Remembrancer reading from Helena's diary.
Which winds up revealing, at least to the audience, that she kind of has romantic feelings for Kaz, although that much was already at least a little bit clear. This really spells it out, though, for the audience.
Then there's the phone call from Agatha, where the tension really ratchets up.
As while Kaz is outside, answering this phone call, the Remembrancer is trying to force a look at Helena's face.
However, I do want to point out where Agatha threatens to write Kaz out of her will.
I mean, you could probably chalk this up to an empty threat, something said in the heat of the moment when you're angry, but she really doesn't seem very ready to write him out of much of anything by the end of the episode. I get the impression that there's an untold part of this story, but unfortunately, even if we do get a second season, I don't think we're going to hear it.
Right, so new plan, pretend to be a race car driver and turn off on the Lincoln Tunnel during the race.
So it would seem fitting if Helena were the one to drive, right?
I grew up in the city. I have no idea how to drive.
But Kaz does.
Why? Throughout this whole series, we haven't seen Kaz have to drive himself anywhere. Okay, look, as much as it was overdone in Birdemic, I think even one scene of Kaz having to drive would have actually been beneficial to make this work a little bit better. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm willing to believe that Kaz can drive. However, there does come a bit of a flaw when Helena's excuse applies to Kaz, since Helena's excuse isn't, I live underwater, you jackass.
There's a couple of spots during the race I want to specifically talk about.
First, we'll start with the walled city.
The walled city? But don't people live there?
Sir, Yokio doesn't concern itself with the safety of its slum denizens.
That right there explains the entire point of the walled city segment. It's showing the bottom end of the food chain so that we can see just how unjust the system really is. This is where I'm sure that it would probably come across that this series is outright pro-communist, although, again, I question that. Although, now reviewing this and knowing the twist at the end that I'm not going to tell you yet, Charles sounds a little bit snarkier than usual here. I mean, sure, we already know that Charles filters the voice of the pilot and filters what the pilot says, but there's got gotta be like certain aspects of personality that carry through even with that filter, you know what I mean?
After the Guggenheim, which is not important, fuck Canada, man, we have the tunnel.
And this is where Archangelo makes a heroic sacrifice for his homie by crashing into the fucking tunnel. Alright.
His sacrifice of flooding the whole fucking tunnel for no reason will not be forgotten as we... Oh, he's fine.
I love being in public when my hair is wet. I feel like a Gucci model.
Okay, seriously, Ezra. Is Archangelo gay? Look at this shit!
The moment right before he turns into the Lincoln Tunnel also holds quite a bit of weight.
Because if you'll recall, the person he's racing against is Kathy, his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend. He knows that he can prove that he's better than this guy. But he doesn't. This symbolizes him moving on from those initial scenes where he was still mourning over losing Kathy. This is a great example of just a small bit of visual and audio, just a small little thing, showing a ton of character growth and really showing how the character evolved through the course of 6 episodes.
So he turns off, but the Remembrancer chases him down.
And it looks like Kaz is going to be caught. And you know what? I honestly thought it was reasonably possible that they could just end the series on a downer like this.
Turns out it's Sadie that's in the Louis Vuitton bag, and Helena was in Charles this whole time.
So the plan was really never to have Kaz and Helena leave together. You know, in a way, that's Helena kind of breaking up with Kaz. Although, something about this, it seems like a bit of a Xanatos gambit, doesn't it? I mean, how would Helena, or Sadie for that matter, really know that the plan to have Kaz drive off wasn't going to work? I mean, and if they did, why not tell Kaz about it?
The series ends full circle by replicating the first scene with Helena as the ex instead of Kathy.
And there's one line in here that tells me that maybe they didn't give an entirely satisfying ending on purpose.
Everything is falling back into place. And yet, I can't help but feel that Neo Yokio is about to explode.
That's the last line of the entire series. Look, I know there's been no announcement of a season 2, but that practically ends on a cliffhanger. And hell, probably the only person who gets a complete story told is Helena. We don't really get necessarily... No, we get complete stories of other people, but that cliffhanger really indicates to me that there's more to this to tell. And the thing is, I kind of want to see it. For various reasons. This show is so good, and yet it's so bad, and it could be made so much better or worse based on the further information to come. And I know what I must do. I know what I must do.
First of all, we have Steve Buscemi reading from Helena's diary. I was gonna call him the Remembrancer. I really was. But I fucking... You try pronouncing Remembrancer really quick. Okay, let me do it again. Well, first of all, we have the Remembrancer reading from Helena's diary. Probably sounds like shit. I don't even care.